Welcome, guys, back to the I Love Wrestling podcast. I'm your host, as always, Justin Woolwine. Today we are welcome with Mr. Marek Brave. How we doing, man?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on. Excited to chat with you, and I'm actually kind of surprised that the I Love Wrestling podcast that name wasn't already taken.
I
You're
was
the first
surprised
one.
myself. Yeah, as far as I'm aware, there's a I like wrestling. I've never seen an I
Okay, so
love
they're
wrestling.
not as committed as you are. They just like
Exactly,
wrestling. You full on love wrestling.
100%. It's next to my fiance, my favorite thing in the world.
Well, that's good. We love to hear it.
I first thing I want to say, thank you. I know it's a busy week, being WrestleMania week. I'm sure you're a busy man. I appreciate you jumping on here and talking with me. It's quite the honor. I've had so many of your students on, being from the Chicagoland area, that I am honestly super surprised it was easy to get in touch with you and make this happen. So thank you.
Hey, you caught me at a good time. We don't have any classes in April. So I elected not to go to WrestleMania this year. So I had some free time this month, and you popped in the DMs, and here we are.
Okay, so I got lucky. um, here on the I Love Wrestling podcast, I try to start at the beginning of not only like your wrestling career, but maybe your wrestling fandom, because we're all fans at heart. So with that said, like when did you find professional wrestling, and what about it made you fall in love with it?
Well, I found wrestling quite a long time ago. Every time I do one of these interviews, it makes me feel just a little bit older. Probably the first interview I ever did, I was like, "Oh yeah, I found wrestling in the early '90s," and it was, the early 2000s. So that wasn't that long ago. But now we're talking upwards of 35 years ago at this point, pretty close to 35 years ago. It was the early 90s. I was actually living in Kansas. Hadn't made my way to Davenport, Iowa yet. Thankfully, I did. Life turned out pretty good because of that. But I was living in Kansas at the time. I had a neighbor named Brad, and Brad loved wrestling. Actually, he kind of looks, he was a little kid. He was 5 years old. But if he grew up, I'm sure he did grow up, right? Did I just announce the death of my neighbor on a podcast? I don't know. I haven't kept in touch with Brad throughout the years. But you look a lot like an adult version of my neighbor Brad. But anyways,
Okay.
he was a big wrestling fan. And one day he was just like, "Hey, let's get on the trampoline and do some wrestling." We did that for a little bit. It was a fun time. And then he's like, "All right, come over and I'll show you some of my wrestling tapes, his VHS tapes." And so he popped a VHS into the VCR and got out some of his black and white wrestling magazines because they were still making them in black and white in the early '90s. And I finally got to see what wrestling was. The whole time we were on the trampoline, I was kind of just guessing, didn't really know what it was all about. But as soon as I saw wrestling in the magazines and on the VHS tapes, I was like, "What is this? This is amazing. Why has my mom never showed me professional wrestling?" And I was hooked from day one. I was hooked. Soon after we'd get Monday Night Raw on television, and I never missed an episode as a kid. In fact, the only time I did miss an episode was because my mom grounded me from wrestling for a week for doing something at school. I'm not exactly sure, probably giving somebody a pile driver out on the playground. But she grounded me from it for 1 week. But other than that, I didn't miss an episode of Raw from, the time it began up until, gosh, maybe 5 years ago. So it's been quite the journey. But yeah, all this my journey started with my neighbor Brad in Garden City, Kansas, and I would say about 1992.
Okay. So I'm guessing you was a WWF kid, not a WCW kid.
Yes, I was a big WWF guy as a kid. I loved Shawn Michaels. I loved Bret Hart. I loved The Undertaker. I loved Razor Ramon and Diesel. I was heartbroken when Scott Hall and Kevin Nash went over to WCW. I would tune in every now and again, kind of flipping back and forth on the channels like a lot of people did. But if you ask me which side my flag was planted on, it was firmly planted on the WWF side of things.
So, like growing up, did you know, hey, I'm going to try to be a professional wrestler, or was there any other avenues that you thought about going?
Oh no, I honestly I became a wrestler uh my senior year in high school is when I first started wrestling professionally in front of paying audiences. But even then, I didn't think, oh, I'll be a full-fledged professional wrestler someday. I just did it because it was fun to do. So no, as a little kid, I had no aspirations of actually becoming a pro wrestler. It was just something that I loved and was obsessed over, really. At one point I wanted to be in the NBA, and my mom was like, well, you might want to have a backup plan. I'm not sure that that's a very realistic option. So I guess my backup plan was professional wrestling. But no, there were other points in time where I was like, oh, maybe I'll be a veterinarian or maybe I'll be a priest. I went to Catholic school when I was a little kid. So I was like, oh, I'll do all these things. And then, the years went by and I changed my mind about all that stuff. And I was getting ready to graduate high school, and I was like, well, shoot, what do I do now? I don't really want to go to college. I'm supposed to go to college. I have some scholarships to go to the University of Iowa, but I don't really want to do it. I don't like school, and man, maybe if I stick with this pro wrestling thing, I can actually make something of myself. And at that point, I had been friends with who would later become Seth Rollins for a couple years, and we had wrestled together. And he was like, "Hey, man, I'm going to go to wrestling school, and I think you're pretty good at this stuff. And if you're looking for something to do, you should come with me to wrestling school." So we went up to Chicago after our senior years of high school, and we got our full-fledged training done. Up until then, all of our training was day camps. We just sign up for day camps with various wrestlers like Samoa Joe and CM Punk and Shane Douglas and a handful of other guys. But up until then, I would say about our first year and a half in wrestling, we were just doing the day camps. But after we graduated high school, that's when we decided to go get full-fledged professional wrestling training up in Chicago by a man named Danny Daniels, who still runs AAW in Chicago today.
That's nice. AAW is like I go to AAW's almost every month.
Awesome.
I'm
So you've
about
seen my
2 hours
banner
away.
hanging up on the
Yes,
wall.
sir. You and Rollins' banner is up there. I yet to take a picture beside it. I've been meaning to because like all the stars up there is really cool. But now it's cool to finally talk to somebody who's been on one. Yourself and Jimmy Jacobs are the only two
Oh,
men I've
awesome.
ever talked to that are up on that wall.
Hey, Jimmy's great. I love Jimmy. I would consider Jimmy one of my closest friends in the professional wrestling business due to our time together in AAW. And prior to that, IWA Midsouth. We ran around the towns a lot back in the day together.
What was your time like in AAW, like as far as training goes? Before we get to the full part of like the AAW run, what was that training like?
Yeah, so Danny actually trained us before he was the owner of AAW.
Okay.
AAW was started by just some local Chicago guys, and they were doing their thing. And they booked Danny because Danny's from Chicago as well, but he wasn't an owner yet. He didn't buy into it until actually we were finished training. But our training was great. Danny's a no nonsense kind of guy. Like he's gonna give it to you straight, which is what you need when you're training to be a professional wrestler, because this is a difficult business, right? So you need somebody who's going to bring you in without telling you you're great when you're not great, right? You're not going to get your money's worth if somebody's telling you you're awesome when you actually stink. So Danny, he didn't mince words. If we sucked that day, he told us we sucked that day. He told us why we sucked and what we needed to do to get better. So I always appreciated the bluntness with which Danny would speak. We only ended up training with him for about 2 months because, like I said, we had been wrestling for about a year and a half prior to going to Danny. So we knew how to do all the moves and we knew how to bump and we knew how to run the ropes and all of that stuff. What we didn't quite fully grasp at that time was the storytelling element of professional wrestling, the psychology, so to speak, of professional wrestling. And so when we went to Danny, that's where he kind of put the finishing touches on our acts and what we do. And by the time we were able to combine our athleticism, which was pretty high back in the day, we were kind of known for our high flying prowess, and Rollins still dabbles in the high flying arts today. But once we were able to combine our athleticism with the psychology of professional wrestling, like then we were like, okay, now we can really make something of ourselves. And it all happened pretty quickly after we graduated. We graduated from his wrestling school in December of 2004, and then immediately started wrestling for IWA Mid-South. I believe our first matches were with IWA Mid-South were February 2005.
No.
which was really, really quick for a couple of young green kids. Thanks to Danny, he was working for IWA Mid-South, but and once you got to IWA Mid-South, at that time, you got to understand, like that's where all the big stars were on the independents. You had CM Punk and Colt Cabana and Jimmy Jacobs and Alex Shelley and Chris Hero and Claudio Castagnoli and the names I'm forgetting some, Matt Sydal and Delirious, and the list really goes on and on and on. So many great workers there. Eddie Kingston was there at that time, and we got to step in the ring with these guys. And so through our interactions with them, we quickly got better ourselves. And so, the combination of training with Danny and then immediately wrestling a lot of these big name indie guys on IWA Mid South was just like the perfect storm, the perfect combination to get us to where we wanted to go in pretty short order.
IWA Midsouth is somewhere that's always fascinated me. I grew up originally in West Virginia, and there we had IWA East Coast, which was ran by Madman Pondo, and
Yeah,
then
I know Pondo.
Ian ran Mid South. So like I grew up knowing Ian and Pondo fairly well, honestly, from seeing them monthly. So it's always that company, or I mean, branch of companies has always been something that's really intriguing to me. What was your experience like overall working with Ian and IWA? And would you consider it maybe like your first break when it came to wrestling?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Wrestling for IWA Mid South at that time was kind of a big deal. It was, in my opinion, unless you count Ring of Honor, I think IWA Mid South was the largest independent company in the United States at that time. The indies have blown up and kind of become their own conglomerate right now, and you got companies like GCW and MLW and various other places. I mean, too many to count, really, that are really killing it and doing big time things, but. Back in the day, the indies, it was small time business. But if you were able to get on an IWA Mid South card, you knew that your match was going to be seen by a whole lot of people because they were really big in the tape trading scene, and there was also a lot of talent scouts within WWE at the time that were watching IWA Mid South to kind of scout future talent, and so you knew we'd get like feedback passed through, like a game of telephone, passed through various people. We'd get feedback from guys like Tommy Dreamer, who's like, "Oh, I watched your match, and here's what I thought." He wasn't calling us or texting us, but he told this guy who told this guy who then was on a show with us in IWA, and they'd give us Tommy Dreamer's feedback, and that was really cool at the time. So yes, IWA Mid South was definitely our first break in the business, and I never had any issues working for IWA. I guess I didn't have these grand expectations for these big paydays like some of these other guys might have just because they had been in the business for quite a while. So Ian never really stiffed me. I remember one time Seth and I worked for him and we didn't have a place to stay that night. And he was like, "All right, well, I'm not going to pay you to wrestle, but you can sleep on the floor of my hotel room and I'll get you dinner." And we were like, "Man, that's actually a pretty good deal. By the time we rent a hotel room and buy dinner, that's going to cost us a pretty penny." And so we slept on the floor of a really crappy motel room. And our dinner was we got to split a 20-piece McNugget from McDonald's that night. So it's not like we were eating good, but hey, it was something in our bellies and a place to lay our heads. So we couldn't complain too much. But I never had any issues working for Ian. He always took care of me. He liked me. He liked Seth. He always put us in really good matches that allowed us to showcase our abilities. And I really do think if it wasn't for IWA Mid South, I'm not going to say that Seth never would have made it or that I wouldn't have made it to a level where, now I'm a respected head coach in the professional wrestling business, but it probably would have taken a lot longer to get noticed. So always grateful to Ian for what he did. I know other people have problems with it, problems with him and problems with IWA Mid South, and that's their deal and they can tell their stories and speak their truths, so to speak. But for me, I never had an issue with the man.
That's something that like from doing this podcast, I find very interesting because like when it comes to the subject of Ian Rotten, people either really love Ian or they really don't love Ian.
Sure.
And it's very divided. Like it's almost 50-50 from what I've had on here. So it's nice to see people highlight him in a positive light because I've only had positive experiences. Now, granted, I was a 5, 6, maybe 7 year old kid. I don't think he's gonna be mean to me. So so like it's cool just to see the him get respect where it's deserved, I guess is what
Sure,
I'm trying to
sure.
say.
And everyone has their faults, and I mean, you could pick any name in the professional wrestling business ever, and if you ask 100 people, you're probably going to get at bare minimum a 60-40 split on, oh,
Yes.
he's great, or he's a jerk, or she's awesome, or oh no, she's mean to everybody she talks to. So you're never it's very difficult to get somebody who's universally loved. There are people like that out there. Jerry Lynn comes to mind, one of the first guys I think everyone would agree on that he's great in every way. But Ian, he had his faults, just like any other human being does. But I do think that without Ian Rotten and what he did within IWA Mid-South, I'm not sure that indies ever blow up the way that they currently have. I'm not sure they
De-
do.
Definitely not. I mean, just based off like the research I've been able to do for the podcast, so many guys from your era or even a little bit before that era went through IWA and made a name for themselves. Like I'd say probably 80% of the guys on TV we wouldn't be seeing on TV
Yeah,
if it wasn't for
absolutely.
that platform.
Yeah, I mean, I met, like I said, Claudio there. I met Ricochet there, and Chuck Taylor there, and so many guys, Eddie Kingston and the like, and it was just a great place to be if you were trying to get quality matches, quality opponents. Listen, the ring sucked. It was a terrible ring. It was a homemade ring. They used pink shag carpeting as the mats that go underneath the canvas. That's the only time in my life I've ever been in a ring that didn't have actual, foam padding underneath the canvas. It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, but I think it was, at least speaking for myself personally, it was more positive than negative, and I wouldn't trade those experiences for anything. It really was a time of my life.
That's amazing. I'm gonna go back a little bit, but you mentioned kind of a little bit of like meeting Seth early on. When did you actually meet Seth?
Yeah, so our birthdays are less than a month apart, and I met him maybe 3 weeks after he turned 16, and just a couple days before I turned 16. So he was 16, I was 15, but we might as well have both been 16 years old. I met him outside of an arena here in the Quad Cities. It's actually in Moline, Illinois. At the time, it was called the Mark, ironically enough. Um, and my group of friends went there to camp out overnight so we could get front row seats to a SmackDown taping that was coming to our arena. And by the time we had gotten there, Seth and his friend group were already there, and they were doing some backyard wrestling and flipping off of these giant concrete blocks and just doing a bunch of crazy stuff. And me and my group of friends, who we kind of just did some stuff on the trampoline, nothing too wild. We looked at those guys and we were like, man, we got to be friends with those kids. Those guys are really cool. So we went over, we introduced ourselves, we got to talking, and we all just kind of hit it off in that moment. And we hung out all night together. And they told us of a local backyard company that was putting on shows, and they invited us out. And I would say a couple weeks later, we went to one of those, and we were hooked right from the jump there. And it was just our love of professional wrestling that bonded us and kept us friends, literally from that day all the way up until now. I would say that was probably in June of 2002 when we met. So, I mean, we're coming up on a quarter century of friendship here. Um, and again, it's just another one of those serendipitous things where if we don't go to that arena that night to camp out to get tickets, what am I doing in life now? Would I have ever stepped foot in a wrestling ring? I'm not sure. It was all by chance. At the beginning, a lot of hard work went into it after that, but all by chance in the beginning, and I'm really thankful that this is the way, this is the direction my life took.
You guys would go on to train together, work together, but like, what ultimately just made you guys decide, like, hey, let's team together, let's jump in here and try to run the tag team scene?
What's funny is we had no um, aspirations to ever be a tag team. It wasn't even something that we had thought would be possible. We were both singles wrestlers. We for the year and a half that we were working before we went to Chicago to get fully trained, we were just singles wrestlers. We did our own thing. And we trained together, and that was cool, but we didn't have any tag matches during training, and we wrestled each other one on one and had a good time. And then all of a sudden we show up to our first show post training. We just hopped in the car with our trainer, Danny Daniels, and we got there. And they were like, "Hey," and this was long before matches were announced on the internet for indie cards. It was just like, "Hey, there's a show here on this day. You should come." And so we showed up, not knowing what we were doing that night. We didn't know who we were wrestling, and they were like, "Hey, you guys are in a tag team. What's your tag team name?" And we were like, "Oh, we've never thought about that." And they're like, "Well, you got about 20 minutes to figure out what your name is so we can give it to the ring announcer." So we're sitting there and we had no idea what we would call ourselves. And I don't even remember what any of the other suggestions were, but I sat there and I was like, what could we do? And I was just like, what if we call ourselves the Black and the Brave instead of the old, TV soap opera, The Bold and the Beautiful, I believe it's called. I don't know why
Yeah.
that was running around in the back of my head. And I was just like, we'll be the Black and the Brave. And Seth was like, yeah, all right, I dig it, I like it. And we told the ring announcer, and the Black and the Brave was formed in that moment. But we had no idea that we were going to be a tag team. It never even crossed our minds. But we were both young, in shape, long dark hair, and I guess when promoters looked at us, they said, "Oh, these guys look like they already look like each other, so let's put them in a tag team." And so from that moment, I would say for the next about 3.5 years, up until I suffered my neck injury, which I'm sure we'll cover, we most of the time when we were getting bookings, it was as a tag team all around the Midwest for a bunch of different organizations and companies. And eventually we did end up winning the NWA Midwest Tag Team Championships, which was really cool. NWA meant something back then. It's kind of gone through a resurgence over the last few years. But back then it still kind of had it still harkened back to the original National Wrestling Alliance days. So that was a pretty special moment for us winning those belts, and then eventually we ended up winning the AAW tag team titles. But that was the night that Seth turned on me and hit me with the belt and busted me open, and that began our year-long feud in AAW that would eventually culminate in a no-roped barbed wire match.
Yeah, that was my next question. You want to just tell us a little bit about that blood feud between you and Seth that you guys had for that year?
Sure. Yeah, so that we were young. We were young. We were 19 years old, I think. And for a company, now, albeit it was run by our trainer, so he had a little bit of bias towards us, but for a company to put the stock of the entire organization into two 19-year-old kids having this year-long feud with each other, which is pretty rare on the indies in and of itself. But to do it with two 19-year-old kids, and we were kind of known as the pretty boys of the Midwest scene, um, being young like we were and having the long hair, and then also kind of the in-ring technicians and the high flyers and stuff like that. We weren't deathmatch guys, so for it to culminate in a no rope barbed wire match was pretty unheard of for a couple of guys that weren't known for death matches. So, but we were nuts when we were younger. We were down to do anything, and so when it was brought to our attention, or somebody approached us with the idea to do a no rope barbed wire match, there wasn't any hesitation. We were both like, hell yeah, let's do this. And I don't think we knew what we were getting ourselves into until we actually stepped foot in the ring that day and felt the barbed wire. And we were like, oh, this is gonna suck. This is gonna suck really bad. But at that point, we were already committed, and it's not like we were gonna go out there and have a half-ass match. We were gonna go out there and give people a show. So we did a bunch of, I don't know if you've ever seen the match, but we did a bunch of crazy stuff. Especially considering that match happened in 2006. So again, almost 20 years ago, we did a bunch of crazy stuff that people weren't doing, and it ended up being a good time. But I don't think a lot of people know this, but I had food poisoning going into that match. I was like laid up in my bed, like near death for 3 days prior to that match. But there was no way I was going to cancel on the show. This was the main event. This was a year-long feud leading up to this. And I knew I was winning the heavyweight championship that night. So I wasn't staying home. So I got my ass in the car. We drove up to Chicago, about 2.5 hour drive. I laid down underneath a table in the dressing room that day, and I just slept all day long until it was time to get ready for the match. And we quickly put a few things together and went out there, and the rest is history. But you know, for them to trust us to do that, and then combined with the fact that I had food poisoning going into that one, and then later it being named the best match in Chicago for all of 2006, and that included any promotion, not just AAW. All of that led to a pretty special ordeal there, and something that we both still look back on that match and say, what were we thinking? But also, we're very proud of the result.
What did it mean to you to be like given the opportunity to be world champion at that time?
Yeah, it was scary. I I still considered myself as a green kid. You know, I still considered myself as a young guy in the business, even though I've been wrestling for about 2.5 years at that point, prior to winning that. But so I was nervous, I was scared, but I was also excited. I was also proud that somebody, and not just one person, but a handful of people, the entire booking team looked at me and said, "That's the guy. That's the guy we want to put the strap on. We want to make him the face of the company, and we want to see where it goes." You know, and so that was my first major singles championship in independent wrestling, you know, outside of some smaller ones that I won on some smaller shows closer to home here in Iowa. And so it was a big thing, a big deal. Something I was very proud of, something I was nervous about, but hey man, if you're not in it to be at the top and you're not in it to be a champion, then I can't relate to that. So I was ready and I was excited and very thankful that they put their faith in me like that.
Definitely. And it's especially at that moment in your career, at that time in your career, getting an opportunity like being a world champion, it's kind of rare air, especially 2 years in. Like a lot of guys don't get that, and to do it against your best buddy in the world had to be fulfilling.
Yeah, it really was. And you know, when people ask me my favorite match in my entire career, that's probably number one, and if not, at least in the top three. So,
Okay.
to this day, and I'm getting older now. I don't wrestle as often as I used to. Kind of pick and choose my battles here. But I would venture to say that that will end up being my most talked about, most well-known match from my career. Maybe outside of the botched shooting star press.
You said maybe sometimes top three. What would those other two candidates be for your top three matches?
What's funny is they're nothing big, nothing. It wasn't
Okay.
like main events or championship matches or anything like that. I would say the first time I wrestled Jerry Lynn, just because it was really special. It's somebody I looked up to, and somebody who was a genuine, tried and true veteran at the time. He had wrestled for ECW and WCW and WWF. He had won titles in every company that he had worked for. He was former ECW World Heavyweight Champion. Um, he was just head and shoulders better than me, but somebody I was able to get in the ring with and hold my own and not crap the bed. And I was somebody I was able to earn the respect of by the time the match was over. So that one stands out for me. And then I remember having a match with Claudio Castagnoli in IWA Midsouth. And Claudio is also just somebody who's a phenomenal wrestler, has always been a phenomenal wrestler. And so I was very, very excited to have this match. And he ended up working over my leg in the match. And, you know, I don't know how deep into the woods fans get with stuff like that, but for us wrestlers, we know that a leg heat is maybe one of the more challenging heats to put into a match because you got to sell that thing for the rest of the match, or else it doesn't make sense. You know, everybody kind of knows what it feels like to have a bum leg, and so. I put a lot of effort into selling the leg in that match, and so much so that I think I hit a frog splash off the top rope at one point later in the match, but I did it on one leg. Like I jumped off the top rope completely on one leg. And I remember getting to the back after it was all said and done, and Ian Rotten just like he was fired up and he like yelled to the whole locker room. He's like, "That's how you do it. That's how you do it, kids. That's how you do it. That was the sell job of a lifetime." And I just remember being like, "Hell yeah, that's really cool." You know, looking around and seeing all these guys that I looked up to and having them kind of go, "Hell yeah, good job, Merrick." So that one always sticks out in my head as something that I'm pretty proud of as well. And I couldn't tell you when it was. I don't know what show it was on. I don't know what time of year it was on. I just remember it was IWA Mid South and me versus Claudio Castagnoli. So that was a fun one. But you know, I've had main events all over the country. I've won championships all over the country. I've been doing this for almost 22 years at this point. But some of those smaller matches, they stick out into my head for very specific reasons, and those were a couple there.
You know, something that I noticed from your career, and we've talked about IWA, we've talked about AAW, but another company that's been there throughout pretty much the whole duration of your career is SCW. How important has SCW been to the overall aspect of your career?
Immensely important. SCW was that backyard fed that I was telling you about. That when I first met Rollins, he
Okay.
was like, "Hey, you gotta come check out this wrestling company called SCW. This is gonna be a good time." And at the time, believe it or not, it was a makeshift ring located on the second level of a barn out on a farm somewhere, right? So when we got to the show, I think we paid like our $2 to get in, and we had to climb a ladder. Like that was up against the wall. We had to climb a ladder just to get to the second level, just to watch this backyard wrestling show. But it didn't feel like backyard wrestling because it was a ring that was in a barn, and the turnbuckles were screwed into the support posts of this barn, and it just felt like really fun, really cool, really underground type atmosphere. And then after it was done, the guy who was running it at the time, he was like, "All right, show's over. If anybody wants to get in the ring and goof off, now's your chance." And like that would never happen in today's world, but back then, me and my buddy Keith, we were like, "Yeah, let's go do that." And we were big trampoline guys, so we had a couple skills tucked away, and so. I was like, I'm going to impress these guys right now. And I ended up doing a backflip, and then my buddy Keith ended up doing a front flip. And the guy who invited everyone in the ring, he looked at us and he was like, "Whoa, that was really cool. You guys are in." And so we became members of SCW, this backyard company at the time. But shortly after that, they ended up getting a real ring, ordered it from High Spots. It got delivered. We set it up in a gym to a local church, and that was the first time I ever got in a professional wrestling ring. And I think I practiced all day, 7, 8 hours in a row, was extremely sore afterwards. But it was like, well, we have a ring. What do we do now? Well, I think we just start putting on shows inside gymnasiums and bingo halls around here and charge money to have people come out. And that's what we did. And then, half of us went to get trained professionally, and the other half kind of fell off and settled into real everyday life. But if it wasn't for SCW, again, I'm not sure I'm doing this. And coincidentally, now I run SCW, and now I put on independent shows all across Eastern Iowa and Western Illinois, as the owner operator of SCW, and I've been doing that for about 16 years now.
Uh, you brought up your neck injury earlier. Did you think after that injury that that would mark the end of your in-ring career?
Yeah, absolutely. So my neck injury occurred when Rollins and I were trying out for Ring of Honor down in Florida. We were at FIP, and we were in a main event tag team match with Jay and Mark Briscoe, the Briscoe brothers, a couple of guys that we very much looked up to, a couple of guys we studied, and we were very excited to be able to get an opportunity to work with them. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned with one of the spots, and I was going for a reverse Hurricane Rana on Jay Briscoe, and instead of flipping over the top of me, he just kind of went backwards and landed directly on top of me when I was upside down, and my forehead was actually in the mat. And so when he landed on me, it compressed everything. And if you pause the DVD at the right time, you can actually see the back of my head pressing in between my shoulder blades on my back. It looks like I was decapitated. So it ended up being pretty severe. Gabe Sapolsky, who was running FIP at the time, now runs the WWE ID program. He came running down to the ring and he said, "Don't get up. We're calling you an ambulance." And I was like, "No, no, no, I got to get up. I got to finish this match. I got to take the finishing move from the Briscoes." And he was like, "Nope, I got an ambulance coming. If you get up, I'll never book you again." And I was like, "All right, I'll stay down here." So they finish the match. The ambulance comes. I get taken to the hospital in this ambulance. I didn't have insurance at the time. I was a 20-year-old kid with no insurance, going to a hospital in Florida, half a country away from my home. And once they found out I didn't have insurance, they were like, all right, we'll take a quick x-ray of the neck. All right, nothing's broken. We'll send you on your way. Well, what they didn't see, because they didn't do an MRI or a CT scan, was that I had two herniated discs in my neck, and they were centimeters away from herniating into my spinal column, which would have left me paralyzed from the waist down for the rest of my life. But I didn't know that. And so uh, Gabe was generous enough to get me a plane ticket home because we drove down to Florida, and I wouldn't have been able to make that 22-hour drive back home in the condition I was in. So he ends up getting me a plane ticket back to Iowa. I was kind of bedridden for a couple weeks, could barely move, could barely walk. I was in an immense amount of pain. But eventually I was able to get up and get moving again. And I tried going to the gym because that was, part of my routine at the time. I was in really, really good shape at that time. And it was excruciating. I couldn't do any of the lifts that I was used to doing. And it was kind of right then and there that I knew I'm screwed. Like if I can't stay in shape, I'm not going to be able to be a successful pro wrestler. And also, if working out hurts this much, I can only imagine what bumping in a wrestling ring is going to feel like. And so it was kind of at that time that I was like, I gotta kind of figure out something else to do. But I didn't really have anything else to do, and the only way I was making money, outside of a few hours working at the local pizza shop during the week was to take wrestling bookings. And so I was taking these bookings, making a little bit of cash, and just not being able to perform the way I wanted to perform. And I got another invitation a few months later to go back down to Florida to have a second tryout match. Because it was kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, get through this match and you're going to get a contract with Ring of Honor because they want you to be part of this group called Age of the Fall with Jimmy Jacobs and Tyler Black. And you guys are going to be this new faction in Ring of Honor. And you just got to get through the match so you can sign your contract and everything will be good. And at that time, I knew I'm not able to perform to the standards of Ring of Honor anymore because I didn't know how to work outside of doing flips and things, and I couldn't do any more flips with the way that my neck and my spine was situated. So I ended up canceling on the booking and telling everyone I'm done. I'm checking out. I'm not going to wrestle anymore. I'm going to retire, which didn't end up happening. I still took a handful of bookings here and there just to make a little bit of cash, but that was kind of the beginning of the end for my aspirations of having a contract with a major company and making a living off of being an in-ring professional wrestler. Coaching was nowhere near. That wasn't in my mind at that point. So I genuinely thought that was the end for me.
Did you ever like actually go and get it operated on and fixed?
I did. Yep. So many, many years later, and again, I didn't know the extent of the injury. And so it kind of healed up a little bit on its own. I was doing all right. And then one day I was at the gym and I was doing an overhead press. And as soon as I locked out overhead, it felt like a stack of dominoes went in my spine and I couldn't stand up straight. And I was like, oh man, what the hell is going on here? And I was like, all right, I better go get this checked out. So I went and got the CT scan. And they were like, all right, or an MRI. And they're like, we'll call you within like a week or so and kind of let you know the results. I got a call 2 hours later, and they were like, whatever you're doing, it was kind of like the stereotypical, hey, if you're standing up, we need you to sit down. Excuse me. And and I sat down and they told me, "Hey, you whatever you're doing, you need to stop wrestling, you need to stop working out, stop lifting. You are at risk of being paralyzed right now if something goes wrong, and you need to get spinal fusion surgery." And I was like, "Oh, that's crazy news," because I had been wrestling for about 10 years after the initial injury up until that point. And thankfully, I didn't have any other major injuries involving the spine during that time, or else I could have been paralyzed. But I ended up, after they told me that, I ended up having two more matches so I could drop a couple titles that I had, which was ill-advised. I would definitely not recommend any wrestler do that. And I went in and I got my spinal fusion surgery. It's a double level fusion. My C5 through C7 are fused together right now, but it's actually a little bit weaker of a fusion than a normal person would get because you're supposed to have three screws, and they put the top screw in, and they put the bottom screw in, but every time they tried to put the middle screw in, it would hit a nerve, and my whole body would start convulsing. From what they told me, I was knocked out. So they ended up having to leave that third screw, that middle screw, out. So I have a double level fusion, but only two of the three screws that I'm supposed to have are actually in my neck. So it's a little bit weaker of a fusion than maybe some of the other wrestlers would have gotten. So I did get operated on, but yeah, after that, then it was definitely like, all right, I need to slow it down. So that would have been, I think 2017 when I got the spinal fusion. So 10 years after the original injury.
And like I saw like I think on your social media is how you were talking about like the process of that and kind of like what it was like to be able to get back in the ring, especially in front of your kids. Like what was that like being able to at least show them that you can perform and show them what you can do?
Yeah, there was a lot of time that passed from the original injury and then when I got the surgery. And during that time, I had two kids. I have two sons. They're a little bit older now, but obviously, they were younger when I got the surgery. And so after a couple years of rehabbing that, I was like, man, if there's any way I can just get back in the ring so that my kids can see me perform, even if it's just one time, so they can see me perform and think, man, dad's the coolest dad in the world. He's way cooler than all my friends' dads. I just knew I had to do it. So I trained hard for it. I trained for about 6 to 8 months. Without telling anyone, I was training to eventually have a match, but I run my own company, so I don't have to tell anyone. So I was in the gym and I was working out, and I would wait till everyone would leave, and then I'd get in the ring and start taking some back bumps and some flip bumps. And okay, all right, this hurts a lot, but it's not injuring me further. I think I can do this. And so when the time came, I told everybody what my plans were, and they were like, "Oh my God, be safe." And I don't think I was as safe as I probably could have been. I went a little crazy those first few matches just because I wanted my kids to see what I could do, and it worked. They think their dad's a superhero now, and they think he's the coolest dude in the world. So I'm very, very thankful that I was able to kind of rehab enough to get to that point.
That's amazing. Um, I just got like one or two more questions left.
Sure.
Um, what made you guys, yourself and Seth, decide to finally open Black and Brave?
Sure. I as a little side hustle to try to make a little extra money, I was kind of running some wrestling classes on my own before we opened Black and Brave, just with some local guys here in Davenport that wanted to get in the ring. So I was running these classes, and it was going all right. Maybe not as well as I had hoped. It was a different generation of individual at that point than when I had broken into the business, and so this was when Seth was down. In NXT, and he was doing his thing down there, but he was still very interested in everything that was going on back home. So he'd text me almost every day, "Hey, how was wrestling training today? How are the guys doing?" And I'd kind of vent my frustrations with him. And he was like, "Well, I'll tell you what. Someday when I get called up to the main roster and I move back to Iowa, we're going to start a wrestling school together." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, sure. Sounds like a great idea," not thinking it would ever happen. And fast forward a few months, and the Shield makes their debut on WWE TV. And he texts me, and I didn't even think about the school at that point. I was just really excited for my friend that he had finally achieved a major goal of his, which was to make it to the main roster of WWE. And a couple weeks after that, he texts me. He's like, "All right, I'm moving back to Iowa next month, and we're gonna open that school." And I was like, "Oh, snap! All right, well, I better I better figure out how we're gonna do that." So we ended up having a bunch of business meetings with some people around here that we kind of partnered with in the beginning while we were getting our feet wet, and not knowing how it was gonna go, I dropped out of college. I had since gone back to college to be a teacher, actually, so it kind of worked out in that way. Um, I froze my credits with a semester to go until I would have graduated with my teaching degree, and we opened the Black and Brave. And it was like, all right, if this goes belly up in the next year, I'll just go back to college and finish that off, and we'll say we had a good time. And it didn't. It's stayed in very high demand over the last decade, and we're still on a 2-year waiting list today to be able to accept new students into the program, and it's been pretty wild. But I just remember I was working at my job that day, and I was in the back room. I was getting ready to stock some shelves, and I just got a text on my phone, and it was from my buddy Colby, and he said, "How would you feel about starting a wrestling school with me when I move back to Iowa?" And I was like, "Man, sure, sounds good." and it ended up working out.
Did you guys ever expect it to be arguably one of the top schools in the world?
I don't think that was anything we ever thought about. I think our goal was just to provide good quality training, not trying to rip anybody off. I mean, it's the professional wrestling business. It's the Wild West out here sometimes. There's so many quote unquote schools out there run by people who are not qualified, and all they're doing is taking people's money and not giving them quality training in return. And we just were like, there needs to be a place here in the Midwest where people can come and know that they're going to learn things the right way, but also learn things the safe way. And so I don't think it was ever like our goal to be considered the best wrestling school in the country or the world or anything like that. There was no uh, grand idea of us ever being recognized by WWE as a top facility, as we recently have with the WWE ID program. It was just all about giving people a spot to come and live out their childhood dream of becoming a pro wrestler. And I think we've done a pretty good job with that over the last decade, and hopefully we can keep it going for a few more decades into the future because it's time of my life. I'm having a blast.
Definitely. I just want to say, just from like my experience of talking to some of your students, they've all are incredible human beings, and it seems like you guys run uh, very uh, tight ship, but a well-oiled machine, if you know what I mean. Like
Sure,
it seems like
and
y'all are doing a fantastic job with
yeah,
the
and
stars you're making.
thank you. And I kind of go back to what I said about Danny earlier in this interview. You know, we learned from him, and I learned from him that, you know, you can't pull punches sometimes. You gotta give people hard truths. And it's not out of a desire to be mean. It's out of a desire to help them be a better version of themselves, help them to get to where they want to go. And the ones who understand that and can push through those moments where maybe they feel like, oh, I should just quit. I'm not getting anywhere. This is too hard, you know. The ones who can push through that, I think they do understand that, hey, you know, it's tough love, but it is love. And the ones who go, hey, I'm gonna quit. This wasn't for me. Maybe they don't get it. Maybe they don't understand. But you know, speaking from experience of the students who have decided to leave, they still feel like they got their money's worth, you know, or the ones who graduate and decide not to ever have a professional wrestling match ever, because we've had a handful of those. You know, they still feel like they accomplished something. I think they accomplished something. It's a tough program to get through, and if you can get through this, I tell people you can get through anything because life is going to throw stuff at you every single day. And it's going to be hard. It's not supposed to be easy. It's not supposed to be fair. Life is difficult. But if you can look back on your 12 weeks that you spent with us doing probably the most difficult thing you've ever done in your life, and you can look back and know, hey, I made it through that, then you can take those lessons with you in whatever challenges you face into the future. And so I'm happy that we're teaching people to be good wrestlers, but I'm also happy that we're providing lessons that can help people become good human beings as well.
Definitely. You know, Marek, I just want to say thank you for coming on. Thank you for blocking out this time to come on here. I greatly appreciate it. Like I told you in text, it's one of those that has been highly recommended. I get you on here, so thank you for letting me have a little bit of your time. Hopefully we can do it again. I'd love to have you on. Maybe dive a little bit deeper into IWA or AAW or some of the other promotions you've been a part of.
Sure. I appreciate you having me on, man. You can hit the DMs anytime you want and we can certainly do it another time.
Sounds good. I will just leave this at see you next time then, Marek.
All right. Sounds good.